Hello, I'm Joshua, and I'm an INTP. And first and foremost, I would like to say thank you for viewing this video and subsequently visiting my channel. Um, the topic of this video will be on modernity and humanism. And what I would like to say in this video is that I have a deep and abiding fear in certain strands of the future, but I'm not anti-future, but I always see not as if they are actual phenomena in the world, but metaphorically two strands of possible narratives. And I don't think anybody can predict the future, and I think that the world is more complicated than what I can summarize in these two narratives, but because the scope of these narratives, given the type of thinker that I am, has a lot to do with being a person in the world and making sense of the world as a human being. I tend to have the fear that there will be soon an affront to human solace and well-being in the world, and it won't come in the shape of oppression or apartheids or any of the political scandals and debacles that are currently a part of our present age. And I don't know, I can't really recall if I've ever mentioned this in present and past tense videos, but I have never been a fan of transhumanism and the transhumanistic ideology of merging man with machine and rushing mankind to an epoch of a singularity, which the reason why I don't appreciate these ideas is because I don't think that we understand what we are fundamentally as creatures, what it means for us to exist in the world. To be a human being is not at all something that lends itself, I think, to having self well being, positive emotion in the same context with limitlessness. I think it is an ancient idea and a true one that the finite makes us what we are, that this ideation, or rather ideology, to eliminate all weaknesses, all infirmities, and uh, imperfections of human beings is a humanism that has gone astray and has become misanthropy. I see much of the track of the future of human endeavors being guided by, I can only say, a misanthropic ideal. And I don't really know how to interpret this or to how to think of it lucidly, other than to say that I am afraid of the fact that we want so much to rid ourselves of the chaotic and tumultuous factors of existence. The idea that life should be made easier, and the idea that the world must reveal itself to us in a utopic or ideal sort of way, is the biggest problem that faces our future. There was the once always the fear in time in the West, at least in America, voiced by George Orwell and other writers. Yeah, I'll just say Aldous Huxley and George Orwell for now. And the potential dystopic future of some totalitarian regime being the centering force of all civil and social communal activity. And I don't think that that narrative is the truest one. I know that the reason that Huxley and Orwell wrote those uh, wrote their works, particularly Brave New World and Animal Farm, and so on and so forth, was because of the communist totalitarian regimes that were and fascist regimes that were arising in the world during their time. But I think what we don't see and we don't know is that there's something far worse out there. I think that people fear their freedom or their capacity to be in the world without arbitrary distinction being violated. And that's the great fear of totalitarianism and fascism's emergence, because the idea that a person has to be whatever is chosen by a set of arbitrary distinctions, and arbitrary in the sense of choices that that individual didn't make, i.e., for example, height, race, gender, whatever, anything. It's not to say that an individual is not made up of their race, an individual is not made up of their culture, an individual isn't made up of their sex, their sexual orientation, or their physical appearance, but it is to say that an individual is more than that, and the state does not, or a monistic force does not care to address anything outside of a collective interest that collapses an individual into an avatar of a certain group or class of things. When people don't want to live as a class of things, people don't conceptualize or really consider themselves as a class of things in the truest sense of human activity, interest, and expression. You find it oftentimes when people from other countries visit neighboring shores that neighboring countries visit Western shores, that they choose to stay, and even those that choose to depart because they want the context of the meaning of their history and their past, leaves because they would rather be and exist as the person that they are in the collective. But it is the case that one of the main suppositions that we make here in the West is that the individual, whether or not they are those types of people that would prefer to be a part of a collective, or whether they are the individual who wants to be something or would seem to take and want to adopt tropes, ideas, and practices that extend outside of the arbitrary context that they were born into this world as. And I only say arbitrary from the sense of the fact that they don't get to pick it. It doesn't mean that it's not meaningful, but whether or not you're born man, woman, trans, whether or not you're born straight, gay, whether or not you're born black, white, Asian, whatever, whether or not you're highly creative or whether or not you have a high IQ, whether or not any of these, no matter what, there is still going to be a distinction between whatever physiological and biological characteristics you came into the world with and whatever socioeconomic class you're a part of, there's going to be a distinction between those factors that comprise you and who you want to be, who you may be motivated to be, what you may be motivated to do in the world. For these things are an amalgam and somewhat of a strange mystery and miracle because they arise. It's a human being and human existence is an emergent phenomenon. It arises out of so many chains of communication between various levels of phenomenology, such that who you are is in the world and apart from the world simultaneously, such that you're a complicated thing. And maybe you just want to be what you're inclined to be and do. And that's what we value in the West, and that's why these types of ideals that want to collapse that for the sake of harmony and the sake of stability and order, collapse those things. That's why that idea is an anathema to many Western thinkers, because even if the systems are inherently disruptive, chaotic, even if there is to some degree unbearable inequality in certain ways, and even if there are historical injustices, I would rather take those evils than to take and subjugate myself, or subsume, or I would just say subjugate myself and shrink the potential of my agency as an individual or as a person. And that definitely has something to do with my personality, but that also is a fundamental aspect of just growing up in America in terms of the ideas that are in the air that you're going to be nurtured by in terms of how you think and how you are as an individual. My point being that fundamentally, I think that there is a very similar kind of terrifying force because it would be terrible in the sense that the reason why any individualist would want to stay away from totalitarian regimes or fascist regimes is because it would be death to them. I mean, my agency is the principal way in which I derive meaning from the world. If my agency was, whether it's really there in the world or it is an illusion of my brain, it is still the fact that agency and the maximization of the agency that I have is the sole arbiter of positive emotion in my world. If that's taken from me, or if I'm no longer able to express that, if I can't really choose who I am, I wouldn't be able to function in the world such that I would want to commit suicide. I can't. That is the only alternative. Give me liberty or give me death. And that's the way my psyche is constituted. And I know that's partly I know a lot of that's cultural, and I know some of that is due to my personality as being an open and disagreeable person or being an INTP. I know that that's the case. But it's the case. But fundamentally, this is the only. I think that the Western landscape, in the sense of individual freedom, is the only landscape which any person could really, really, really be whatever in whomever they want to be. Not to the greatest extent and the truest extent of that possible expression, because it's not like the world's perfect, but it's definitely the case that this land that we're a part of is a land for individuals. It's a land for personal agency. And that's very valuable and precious to me. And I think it is for most people. I just don't think most people question it. To me, fundamentally, however, there is a very, very similar kind of terror that could steal that away rather easily in the modus operandi of transhumanism and transhumanistic interest. I've made videos before that I don't like the mindset of positivity, and I don't like Zen Buddhism. I don't like certain Eastern tropes, and I don't like certain um, interests and inclinations to rid ourselves of what it means to be human. And my fear is that understanding our brain and understanding what it means for us to be in the world and what constitutes our existence is much more complicated than it is to build machines and create structures that can do things in the world and act on it in such a way that it produces some result that we like. And it's definitely most oftentimes the case that human beings' capacities for imagination and fantasy far exceeds their capacity to know the future and to really know their selves. And I'm not any person that says that we should not try and always strive for progress or higher ideals or a better tomorrow or anything like that. But sometimes people can think that change in and of itself is a positive thing, to where sometimes, so I just spin it like this: the transhumanists honestly want to see all characteristics of human beings go away, and this is part of the reason why I don't like religion either, because the idea of an immortal person is a bad idea. I don't like that idea, because why don't I like that idea? I mean, I know why I don't like this idea, but explaining why I don't like it to somebody who may think, dying is an awful thing, and people really shouldn't have to experience death because of the emotional trauma. The honest to God answer I can only give is that trauma is good for you, quite honestly, and death is a necessary thing for the optimal conditions of any system to emerge, a biological or organic one. Anything that can live forever can become corrupt. I mean, that's just the bottom line. Because human beings are not perfect creatures. And two, you don't really know how you're full of malevolence as well as a giant capacity to be good. And there's no saying that if you can't be killed or held accountable for anything, I mean, certainly your reputation and things like that can carry you, can mediate, a reputation can mediate a mortal person, because hell, they can be punished, they can die, and they can be exorcised from a community, which can make them feel a great deal of negative emotion. But if you're going to live, and you're going to live forever, no matter what happens to you, then there really isn't any damn accountability in the world. I mean, that the capacity for an immortal thing to be corrupt is a very, very high capacity. That's why God had to be fundamentally good if he was beyond time and space, because the bloody freaking fact is that being is something that's always susceptible to corruption, unless it can't be corrupt by nature. But it's always something that's susceptible to corruption, because being isn't something that can be in the world in and of itself. Being is always what it is across the landscape or the background of something around it. It's a lot like why you don't really... A good analogy is... So how do you know, okay, so, yeah. So, waves, okay, yeah, waves. Let's take waves. Water is just water, right? The ocean is just ocean. The ocean is just one amorphous sort of thing. It's just a collection of, water and salt. But the minute there's some sort of motion within that water, and the minute there's some kind of, which is a wave and a current and things like that, you can make a distinction between various parts of the ocean versus the rest of the ocean. And that's how being is, because why is being like that? Because there really isn't anything in the world besides
the world. And the reason why it's like that is because perceptually, you can't really tell what's going on in the world unless there are some distinctions and there are some differences. If there's change. If there's no change, then nothing actually honestly exists. And that's why your eyes are very particular in picking out distinctions in the environment in and of itself. And you call these distinctions patterns. And your perception is just construed of all these different patterns. These patterns that seem to have distinctions that emerge from the mix and the void of patterns that is reality. I mean, why your brain puts the world together like that, I have no freaking clue. But that seems to be its evolutionary initiative. The point being is, funny, sorry. But the point being is that your life is like that, or life is like that in general. That the only reason you exist, or the only reason anything exists, is to change its place, state, motion, activity, itself even, its makeup. If it can't do that activity, it doesn't exist. It can't be. And you're... I guess, okay, so it doesn't exist, it can't be. You being an immortal thing makes it such that there is no opposition to you, such that you have to do that extension and constantly move and animate your being. I mean, is it purely physical? No, it's not. But you're also a social, biological thing. I mean, you can't really separate the two because that's where all spirituality and phenomenology emerges from your biology. You can't perfectly separate the two, but it's definitely the case that if you ever suddenly had the ability, and that's saying like just if one person is immortal in the world, I mean I have to keep a simple example. Like we were full of a world of immortals, God knows what the hell would happen with the world then, like I don't know. But it's like, because then nobody can really outlive another person, but still, it's got some issues, man, because you don't really know. So one, if a single person's immortal, they're highly likely to be corrupted. Because people don't necessarily want to be held accountable for things. And this is one thing that people have to very much square away with their nature. Not all people are like this because there are plenty of temperamental variances such as agreeableness and conscientiousness and so on and so forth that makes it such that people want to behave good. But people typically, unless there's some greater consequence for your actions, you tend to want to keep the inertia of your drives and impulses going for themselves because you'd like to be the thing on top of the dominance hierarchy and you don't really care to concern yourself with the world in and of itself as something apart from yourself. Because babies don't think... The reason why babies are assholes, I mean, even though they're cute, they're assholes. But the reason why they're assholes is because they don't make a distinction between the world and themselves. The first distinction they make is between themselves and their mother. And they learn how to make a distinction between themselves and their mother from the cues that their mother gives them whenever they're breastfeeding. That's partly why breastfeeding is necessary for the development of empathy in a child, because the child, and you know it if you have kids or if you've ever been around a 2-year-old, they don't... It's not just that they can't think about their actions and the consequences of their actions like 2 minutes from then, or they can't just remember things. They can't fucking do that either because they don't have a prefrontal cortex. It's a certain other thing. But it's also the fact that they don't see a distinction between themselves and their tools and the world. And your brain works like that too, even when you're an adult. You're socialized and turned into something that makes a distinction between yourself and reality, though that distinction is somewhat arbitrary. I mean, like, the reason why I say it's arbitrary is because you can think about holding a tool or playing a guitar. Your brain, whenever we look at it under an fMRI and stick some EEGs on your head, it sees it as another extension of itself, another extension of its arm, and you may say, well, I'm pretty awkward with tools, I don't ever feel like that's the case. That's why you feel awkward with the thing, because you didn't grow up your entire life with this third arm that you're trying to hold, like maybe in a guitar or something like that, or maybe a screwdriver or something like that. So you have to get your body used to equilibrating itself to having this other limb. But it doesn't, your brain is fairly rudimentary in that way. The world is itself, and that's why in a lot of Eastern philosophy and tradition, certain Eastern philosophy and tradition, God, man is God, man created the world and forgot that he did. And that's an oversimplification of the narrative, but that's definitely the case. And the point I'm trying to make is that you need things in the world to make you what you are. And if you're immortal, a single immortal, there's nothing in the world that you have to subject yourself to, because you're not necessarily interested in doing that in the first place. I mean, you look at kids, they have to be taught manners, man. Like, if a person was able just to exist and never die, that, unless they had a certain set of temperamental invariances, that'd be one malevolent person. That's my estimation. I know that seems pessimistic or whatever. I mean, I'm definitely a humanist, but I'm not naive about what human nature is. Secondly, you don't know how your motivation works. I mean, quite honestly, you don't know how your motivation works. You don't know whether or not, because you evolved to be the kind of thing that you are, that if you didn't suddenly have constraints and obstacles, and there wasn't suddenly ends and let's just say ephemeral environmental cues of urgency, then who knows whether or not you would honestly be able to find life meaningful. And the reason you know to some extent you work like this is because the fact of the phenomenon of sales. The reason why sales are effective with people is because we do have a mindset of urgency. It's also why you can't abstain from eating sugary and fat foods to a certain extent, because you grew up, or your brain grew up. It developed in a landscape that was made to have limitations and urgency to it. I mean, that was very necessary. And maybe you're the type of creature that can only really exist in an equilibrated way with those kinds of limitations and urgency. So don't be so damn keen on getting rid of immortality. Yeah, it sucks that people die, and it doesn't feel good to lose a loved one. But part of the reason why it doesn't feel good to lose a loved one, and I'm not trying to cheapen what happens with people or just turn it into biology. But it's definitely because you have a part of yourself. That's why also, too, that they say that whenever somebody dies, they live in you. Because by you spending time around that person, you're making a mental representation of who that person is with relation to yourself. That person shapes and constructs who you are. That's why you're the sum of the 5 people that you hang around the most, because you're a social creature. That's the reason why that's like that. And when that person dies, you lose a piece of yourself. So that's really hard. That's very, very hard on you. Doesn't mean you don't love that person. That's the only reason why that person becomes a part of yourself, because you love that person. It's a funny thing like that. Yes, even if we're extroverted feelers, we're all somewhat self-referential, because that's how our brain works. And but so that's really hard, and you have to learn how to reconstitute yourself and put yourself together in another way. Maybe that person meant so much to you in terms of the phenomenological landscape that constitutes your experience that you don't want to put yourself back together again after you lose that person. Maybe that's the case, but from a psychoanalytic standpoint and an existential standpoint, the person you can become after you put yourself back together after losing that person is only a greater person than you were previously. Because it's the idea of, I mean, yeah, it might not feel that way, and it may not feel that way initially, but always, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And the reason why that's the case is because you're a complicated thing that's made to act in the world. That's fundamentally what you were made to do. You were arbitrarily given a set of hierarchical goals and ordering structures in your biology such that you're commanded to go out into the world and be a little social agent and make good in the social world that you're a part of and ascend to the top of the dominance hierarchy and have everybody love you. That's basically what you want. But you don't get to pick that, but that's what you do. But because you're, sorry, it's funny, man. Life is surreal. It's weird. It's very strange to be a human. But because you're like that, the case is that you always have the tools and the ability to be something that can reach that height, no matter what it is. Now, there are certainly physiological limitations to every person's ability to do that. No, not all human beings are created biologically equal. That's definitely not the case. And so there's constraints on that. But from a local standpoint, in terms of any individual, your small unit of circle of influence is probably all that you really aspire to attend to, and it's probably all that you really concern yourself with from your day-to-day experience. Most people are locally referential. Almost all people are like that, unless they're really open. And it's the case that space being in its rightful equilibrated state is all that it really takes for you to feel like life is just awesome. But the thing is, in order to make that space what it has to be for your own pleasure, I mean, I'm writing about this in the Secular Project, so that's going to be the name of the site. The point is that you need to do things to the world for it to be pleasing to you, to your own inclinations and interests. And because that's the way you have to be in order for the world to be for life to be justified and affirmative for you, you're always going to be equipped with the tools and the abilities to restructure yourself as a person such that when tragedy hits, you'll be okay. You'll always be okay. You'll always have the capacity and the ability to be okay, so long as you're neurotypical. That's the side entries. So don't go thinking it'd be a good idea to have immortality. And the video is getting kind of long, so I'm going to stop with that example. But there are a number of things that makes it such that we think that ridding ourselves of our limitations would just be euphoric. And we don't realize that we're going to compromise what it means to be human. We're going to very much so compromise what it means to be human in a very, very tragic way, I think. Because we don't understand. Like, we really don't understand what we are. I mean, far from us understanding what we are so very, very far from it. Because there's a lot of ideologies, there's a lot of religious narratives, and there's a lot of ignorance in the world, and there's an inability in terms of technology to really perceive to a great degree what really constitutes human existence. But I can tell you, you had better know what constitutes human existence before you decide to create a transhuman or something overhuman. I mean, that's part of the act of overcoming yourself. Part of overcoming yourself is really learning who you are and what you are, because you'll try to get rid of something and you'll find out that's not going anywhere. No matter what I do, that's not going anywhere. In a sense, it gives you a certain kind of humility, because you do realize what are your biological limitations and what are your physical limitations. And that's also why excellence and striving for excellence is necessary, because you really have to test yourself in some ways to really know what you're capable of. Not just to be a glorious figure or to be successful as a person or have a great amount of magnanimity in the world, but to also really know and understand yourself, because that's highly pertinent for you to just feel all right in the world. And if you don't feel all right, man, there's a slim chance that the communities that you're a part of are going to feel all right, because we're all just in this thing together, not isolated, but it's a very complicated network, man. I mean, I know maybe just extroverted feelers think that everything's connected, but it's true, man. It's not true to maybe from a spiritual or religious standpoint, but it's definitely true from the standpoint that we're living in a system that is consequential in its makeup and is self-organizing, and everything reverberates. All things reverberate. They don't stop with you. Your emotions don't. Your attitudes, your beliefs, your ethics, your morals, none of it does. And so, yeah, man, pursue that excellence. But on the most salient narrative to a relative narrative to what I'm saying now is that we should have things like AI, but we should have AI to do the repetitive tasks that we don't want to do. I mean, work in subjecting ourselves to labor that's less than the sum of our most creative and emotional faculties. I think that's what AI is for. But not to replace people. Not to replace people whatsoever. The responsibility of our world and our thinking and coming up with solutions to our problems should be ours and not a damn robot's. Never for that. And two, we should not want to be robots, man. Like, stop hating human existence. Stop with that. I mean, you don't really know what that's going to do and what that's going to create. I mean, at least with plastic surgery, man, it still somehow fits into the overall desire to be sexually selected, quite frankly. I mean, that's just that's that's sexual selection really expressing itself very strongly in the world. But you take away your limitations, man. You take away who you are to a very strong extent. There is nothing that exists in this world without its opposite in some way, or without something that represses it. You need repression, you need constraints, you need limitations, you need pain, you need suffering, and you need misery. Maybe not to commiserate with other people, but definitely to become the individual that you're supposed to be, or you can see it as that you're meant to be, because there's no person that has your biology that was born into your socioeconomic class and the time period and so on and so forth. And to really solve the existential burden of yourself coming up with your own personal salvation, that is a rather complicated problem. Let's just be frank about it. And in order for you to solve that problem, I mean, I think for any individual, in order for them to solve that problem, they have to become something exceptional relative to them. I mean, who's to say what that really means from an objective standpoint? But relative to yourself, you have to become exceptional. Or you can think about it like this. You have to actualize yourself. Or you can think about it like this. You have to individuate yourself. You have to solve your damn issues, man. That's the bottom line. And you need some issues to solve, or else you can't really be a person. You will never be a person if you're always trying to just get rid of things in the world. Stop trying to get rid of the problems in the world. Stop trying to get rid of your suffering. I mean, maybe overcome it. Maybe harness your sexual energy. Maybe harness your aggressive capacities. Maybe harness the fact, you find that you're envious of other people. Use your envy as a sign that you need to do something more about yourself. Use the very difficult and use the negative emotion. Use all of it. Accept it. Swallow life. Say yes to it. Just do it. It's better for you. You don't have to do it if you're religious. You don't have to do it if you're an ideologue. You don't have to do it if you don't care about having a meaningful life and a meaningful existence. You do not have to do it if you're like, what, that whole meaning thing, I don't care about it. If you would rather be nihilistic, everybody Everybody's free to do whatever they want. You don't have to worry about it and do it. If any of those boxes you want to check off, then check them off and just tune out. But if you want meaning, you have to do it. You just have to do it. Is it easy? No. Is life an easy thing? No, it's not. It's fundamentally wrought with suffering and pain, suffering and misery. But that doesn't mean your capacity to do great things and your capacity, when I say great things, I mean relative to the individual. I think this, no matter how much malevolence is in people, and no matter how much suffering is and pain is in the world, the capacity for human beings to do good with respects to that malevolence is much greater than the malevolence that lives in them. Part of the reason why I think that is because I don't think good is a natural or inherent quality of the world. I really think the good evolved from evil. I mean, I'm not kidding. I think evil was first and good came around later. But I think good emerged as a response to evil. Good can't exist without evil. And, living in a Christian world, they're like... But living in a Christian world, good can't exist without evil. But it's definitely the case that good is always greater than evil because it's the antecedent. It's what precede. No, it's what. Excuse me. It's the antecedent. It's what comes after evil. From a phenomenological standpoint, but not in the sense that I really believe in good and evil. The world's fundamentally chaotic, man. Like, there is nothing... If you look at our evolutionary history, we came down from some damn trees, man, and everything wanted to eat us and kill us, man. We look like a tasty little morsel to everything under the sun, from snakes to giant cats to flying birds, man. Like, everything. Everything. Everything that was a carnivore on that Pleistocene landscape preyed on us. And you better believe many of us have bitten the dust to hungry croc in the Nile, man. Like, it's definitely the case. Or a boa constrictor. Point being that the world is fundamentally chaotic and life is harsh, but what you become in order to take on that world and to sublimate it, literally sublimate that evil to your good, that is just remarkable. And there isn't anything more impressive nor precious. And I really mean the word precious. That is what is the image of God when Christians talk about it. But it's not really God, it's people, man. That's one thing that annoys me as a humanist. Like, God gets credit for everything that's good about human beings. I hate that. Like, I mean, it's like, but my point being is that, yeah, it's necessary. If you swallow it and you overcome it, man is something to be overcome. If you overcome yourself and you just do it, man, like the Nike commercial, like the Nike slogan, just do it, people, just do it, then you will always be able to access the capacity to be that thing that can overcome their environment. And that's where the kingdom of God lives. That's when the world is justified and all is all right. And you feel like master and lord of your landscape, whatever that is. But male, female, whatever. It doesn't matter, man. Like, to actually live out life as an individual when this world does not really appreciate individuals, that's tough. That's tough. But you can do it. You can do it. To my free spirits, I believe in you. Say no to transhumanism. Say no to misanthropy, please. Okay, so that's my video. I don't know what to call it.
But yeah, I guess I'll call it on humanism and anti-humanism. Transhumanism is not a humanism. It's not a humanism in the slightest sense. The idea of us approaching a singularity such that there will be a technological revolution, an epoch, is the same damn narrative of the tree. I mean, I'm not a fan of vegans or anything like that. I mean, I eat a lot of vegetables and I'm a fruit eater and all that stuff like that, but I'm not under the impression that nature is a benevolent thing. Nature was kicking our ass. Do I think that we're doing right by the world? No, I don't. I think global warming is a thing and I think the oceans are screwed. But I mean, I think that it's not, we can make things better. But I don't think that nature is benevolent. And the same narrative that's construed by the tree huggers, let's just say, that nature someday is going to get its revenge on mankind, is the same narrative. It's the same trope. It's all misanthropy, man. It's all misanthropy. And I am not a fan of misanthropy. So that's my video, and thank you for watching.